Am I on? I'm on. Hello, everybody. Let me get situated here. I can see. I'm gonna hold this here like this. It's better. It's closer to me now. So I'm gonna go a little off. It's kind of funny because the prophets. So we got the babies wailing back there like the prophets, and then we also get the joy and laughter of the prophets because sometimes we're silly people and we got to laugh about it. So I'm Patrick. I've been here at Northern Light for a while, and it's an honor to have Colin allow me to be up here to kind of share some things with you. So welcome, and thank you for being here too. I'm here with my wife, Amber, and my beautiful daughters, Emma and Beatrix, who are two most amazing kids I've ever met. They're great. For many reasons, because of my girls, that I'm so passionate about the subject of the sermon today. What I mean by that is that being a parent, I have a vested interest in the world my daughters live in, and I find it absolutely important that I am honest with them about the world and how it works. And then even more importantly, that I show them how to live in the world and how to allow God to use them to transform it into something different, to transform it into the world that God wants it to be. Today we're starting this new series that will run the month of February. We're calling it A Prophet Among Us. Throughout the month, we'll be talking about the prophets of the Bible, who they were, what they were about, and how their message is relevant to us. Because despite the fact that they wrote thousands of years ago, their message is more timely than we might think. But we're also talking about modern prophets, people in more recent memory who have spoken as prophets, who are part of what we will call the prophetic tradition. More specifically, we'll be highlighting the connections between the Old and New Testament prophets of the Bible and Black History Month, which we observe each February. Black History Month was originally the idea of Carter G. Woodson and was developed in the 19-teens and 20s. His idea was to bring light to the achievements of Black Americans after the emancipation of emancipation of slaves after the Civil War. He hoped that their history, the history of rising from the ashes of slavery and their successes against all odds, would help transform race relations. So we continue to observe Black History Month because there's still a lot of transformation that needs to take place, even though we're 100 years past the birth of this idea. The idea of reminding us of our history, and it goes without saying that the history of the slaves and their ancestors is very much our history, is part of the tradition of the prophets who never shied away from pointing out the blatant sins of the present and the past. Along with Woodson are a host of Black Americans who have grappled with racism, including lynchings, discrimination, housing, unjust policing, blatant white supremacy, voting discrimination, and so many other issues that folks of color have had to deal with, and in many ways are still dealing with. They too are part of the prophetic tradition, specifically the Black prophetic tradition, which we will learn more about over the course of the month. So there's a lot going on here. And I want to take us to the beginning, kind of get to the basics to start to tell the story of the prophets. The first thing that I think is important to say is that there are different kinds of prophets, or different ideas of prophets, and different kinds of prophecy, which is just a fancy word for what a prophet says. It's important to make this distinction because the prophets in the Bible are a particular kind of prophet, and maybe not the kind you think. Because the prophets in the Bible are not really concerned with predicting the future, at least not like Nostradamus, who made so many predictions that it's incredible that basically none of them have come true. Some of us would like to think we could read what the prophets in the Bible wrote about and figure out the riddle so that we could know what's going on, presumably so that we don't have to do anything since it's already in the cards. Part of why this happens is because when you read the prophets in the Bible, they use a lot of imagery, a lot of language, which seems very mysterious. It seems like exactly what someone predicting the future would say. There's talk about strange beasts, and there are tales of destruction that would blow your mind. It's poetry, and like all poetry, it's purposefully mysterious at times. Sometimes to the point where we're like, nope, I don't get it, and I don't think I'll ever get it. But again, because it's poetry, it's not so much about getting it exactly as much as it is about getting the feel of it and getting immersed in it. It's easy for me to say this because I am an English major and I have a degree in English and I've written and read poetry a lot. For many, a lot of poetry isn't just not worth the time. And that might be true, but I think we lose out on something important and something big for our faith if we dismiss the prophets because sometimes they just don't seem to make any sense. So if they're not just predicting the future in weird and impossible to understand ways, what do they do? What are they talking about? They're basically about one thing, the truth. The truth. What is the truth? In an age of fake news and alternative facts, what could we possibly take to be the truth? How do we sift through all the excess and find our way to something that we can believe in? For the prophets, the truth is this: that God's world, the one he made, has gone wrong. And someone's responsible, and they need to be called out for it. And someone's been made a victim, and they deserve restitution and justice. And God is paying attention. So get it together, people. This brings us to a crucial term. Theology people like to call it the prophetic imagination. What this means is that prophets see the world as it is, and they see what God has promised in the past about his world and what it should look like. And they imagine the ways in which we can get from point A of an unjust world to point B of a just world. That's why they use strange language, strange images. They help us to see God in different ways, ways that open us up to understand him and his world differently. The prophets aren't about dogma. They're not about rules, because rules and dogma give us a closed view of God, and they're confining. Prophets, with their poetry, open up possibilities. The leading Bible guy when it comes to the prophets is a man named Walter Brueggemann. And in a sermon of his talking about the prophet Isaiah, he says that in just one passage, the prophet calls God a demolition squad, a safe place for poor people who have no other safe place, the giver of the biggest dinner party you have ever heard of, a powerful sea monster that will swallow up death forever, and a gentle nursemaid who will wipe away every tear from all faces. These are pictures of God that give us a much bigger view than we could ever get from thinking of God simply as the punisher of those who mess up. We're not used to thinking about God in these ways, but they show us a God who is more than we previously imagined. The later prophets in the Bible all come from the tradition of Moses. Moses, a nobody who through a series of coincidences lives for a time with Egyptian royalty, then commits murder, and then runs into the wilderness and starts a life as a shepherd. And then one random day, God appears to him in a burning bush, right? We know the story. God says, "You're going to do what I say, and you're going to go to Pharaoh, and you're going to go to tell him to get rid of all of his free labor." And Moses, like so many prophets, was thinking, what? But he was compelled by the fact that he was hearing voices from a bush that was just burning and burning, but actually not burning, no doubt. But also because the truth is something that when it gets a hold of you, you can't get away. And the truth that Moses received was this, and this is God speaking: "I have heard your cries. I have seen your oppression. I am your God, and I will deliver you from evil. Justice will win the day, and you will be free, and no puny little Pharaoh stands any chance of stopping that." And we know how the story goes. Pharaoh's heart remains hard, and even against 7 terrible plagues, until finally, because of what God does, he has no choice left. God saves slaves from empire. That is the result of the first act of the first prophet. And this is a theme throughout the prophets. And that brings us to February 2018, Black History Month in the Black prophetic tradition. Black folks in this country have had every reason to see themselves as Israel and Egypt, as captive of a corrupt empire, and their history is the story of struggle, much like Israel's. And just like Israel had Moses, Black folks have a number of prophets who have been compelled by the truth, especially the truth that they are God's children and that God promises to free the captives and give justice to the oppressed, and have spoken out prophetically against the powers that have held them down. Prophets like Martin Luther King Jr., whose I Have a Dream speech is full of prophetic imagery. This speech borrows from the prophets as he cries out, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." And he provides us with one of the most memorable images in the history of the country when he imagines a world where little black boys and black girls will be able to hold hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers, even in Alabama. A world which looks different than this one, but which we hope for because we believe the truth is on our side. Finally, what does this have to do with us, Northern Light Church in Ramsey, Minnesota? Well, our motto is straight from the prophet Micah. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. It's on the wall. It's something we don't take lightly because it encompasses our calling to live the truth. That God wants to use our community. He wants to use all of us to live out the kind of life now that we would live if all wrongs were already made right. He wants us to imagine that things can be different, that we can be different. We might not have the skills of a poet, but we can be prophetic in our own right. That happens when we open ourselves to see how God is moving in the world, and we are so compelled by love and a want for justice that we choose to speak out, no matter how hard that might be. Now I'd like to talk to you about a very special person. Each week this month, I'll be sharing stories of modern black prophets who have embodied the prophetic tradition. Ida B. Wells, I think we have a picture of her, was born in Mississippi in 1863. She was born to former slaves who were both well-educated and involved in their community. While she was a teen, both of her parents unfortunately died of yellow fever, which left her to take care of her 6 siblings. She had a 7th that also died of yellow fever. Because she was too young, she had to lie about her age in order to get a job as a teacher, and her own education led her to journalism and activism. In 1892, Thomas Moss, a friend of Wells's, was running a successful grocery store. Because white owners were upset about losing business, a mob invaded the store and attacked Moss and others. During the altercation, 3 white men were shot and injured. So Moss and 2 other men were jailed and waiting trial. A mob of white men decided that that wasn't enough, so they swarmed the jail and lynched Moss and the others, making a public spectacle of their deaths. The lynching would stoke a fire in Ida. It led her to become the first to start an anti-lynching campaign in the country. She used her skills in journalism to speak out against the evils of lynching. Her words are prophetic in their call for justice. And like the prophet Jeremiah, the truth was a fire in her bones that she had to let out. She said, "Somebody must show that the Afro-American race is more sinned against than sinning, and it seems to have fallen on me to do so." She did so in the face of hate and violence. She was a prophet among us. In light of her example, what will you do this week to justice? Well, will you allow the truth to compel you to join the prophetic tradition? The good news is you don't have to do it alone. That's why it's called a tradition. We're all in this together. Now it's time to go out and live it.